Live. This might be live. Hello, this is Molten Chat.
This could be live.
This could be live.
Or
what
it
we'd
might
like
not
to
be.
do. Yes, who knows at this
It's
point.
technology.
Tell us that you can hear us and you can see us. If we can know that piece of information, then we can start proper. Because at the moment we're just sort of treading water, just waiting for the streams, waiting for everything to firm itself up. Got a good bunch of people in the chat. Do give us a wave. Let us know. Nice to see you. Oh, they're talking to each other. See, that's no help. They need to talk to me. Talk to me. Can you see us? Can you see us? Give us a wave.
No response from chat.
We see and hear you. Thank you, Cody.
At least Cody can.
Yes.
Okay, 3 people can. That's good enough.
Great. That'll do then. Right, let's kick off. Good evening and afternoon, depending on where you are. Live from London, live from, I have no idea where you are. Somewhere in America, I hear.
Southern California.
Southern California. Fantastic. We are here at a Molten Chat during and inspired by Superbooth this year, the stay-at-home edition. And I have with me Mr. Matt, I did it the right way almost, Mr. Matt Colville. Now, Matt is someone who I've followed for a long time on Twitter. He's a dungeon master, he's a master of games, he's a dialer of dice, is that a word? And a modular enthusiast. Now, yeah. And I've enjoyed watching his module collection grow over the last couple of years or so, and we thought we'd get together and chat about getting started in modular and modular things and the struggle and the excitement and the journey that is. So that's the idea for this evening. I think questions are very welcome in the chat. Throw them in, we'll ignore them, and we may pick up on the odd one from time to time. We will see. But first of all, Matt, how are you?
I'm doing great. I think, like everybody else, I'm socially isolated. I think we're coming up on, March 11th was when my company went to 100% work from home. And so it's almost been 2 months of no human contact other than, Skype calls and stuff like that, which is that's not awesome, but it's better than having the virus. So
yes.
We're going to deal with that. Yeah.
Yes, no, I heard that. No, most definitely.
Yeah, and it's a beautiful day here in Southern California. It's like 85 degrees outside, and it's a bright, clear day, brilliant blue sky. So, yeah.
Lovely. And it's lunchtime where you are, I believe. It's kind of a beer o'clock here, and I do feel sorry for everyone out there who's about to have their lunch and something nice and wholesome when, I can't help myself.
Yeah, I've just got orange juice here, so.
Oh, well. So our ambitions of just getting drunk.
You're going to have more fun than me in this chat.
Yeah, it's not going to work out tonight. Maybe we'll do a really late night one, which that would be interesting. So Matt, tell us a little bit about your. Tell us about your pre-history, your pre-synth history. We're mostly focused on synths. We may delve into other things because I'm very much a tabletop enthusiast.
I know, which is awesome. Yeah,
and
there's been a couple of. There's been a couple of people who I follow just purely for music and modular nonsense that I will respond to, and they'll be like, hey, you're Matt Colville, and I will discover that they are also nerds. Uh-huh. So I used to think there wasn't much overlap between modular synthesis and like tabletop gaming, but I think there's a little.
Oh, I think there is more than we imagine. And funny enough, I was talking to Helen Lee on Monday, I think it was. She's a hardware hacker. Yeah, and she mentioned how before she got stuck into electronics and stuff, she was very much a tabletop role-playing, game-playing type person, which is like, well, of course you are. That's exactly right.
That's
so
awesome.
Yeah, there's a lot of crossover from that.
That makes me super happy. Like you play semi-regularly. You play Twilight Imperium.
I do, yeah.
Which I have never played.
Yeah, I mean, in fact, I've got a game.
I own like. Go ahead.
Yeah, go.
I've got like 2 editions of that game because I bought one edition from a friend of mine, and I didn't get around to playing it before. And then they released the new edition, and I'm like, well, I guess now presumably it's better, so I got to get that one. And I still haven't played that one. And now at this rate, I don't know if I'll ever get to play it. When will I get to see other people again? I don't know.
I don't know. Well,
but yeah, I see you on Instagram.
Yeah. I mean, we have a game banked in Tabletop Simulator at the moment, which is we've
awesome.
Had 2 attempts at, and we've still got to finish it. And it is on a knife's edge. It's all to play for in the last round. I think I'm within 3 points of winning, but then so is everybody else, and it could happen at any moment. That's one of those sorts of games when
Oh, really?
Someone can just win, and you go, "Oh, God darn it!" Or you devote all your energy into preventing someone from winning, so the other person just calmly walks in and
that's
and walks
classic.
off with it. So yeah,
Yeah, I had a friend of mine at my last job try to hook me into playing on a Thursday night, and I was like, "But it's a school night. What do you do?" And he goes, "Oh, it's not going to take that long." And I'm like, "No, you guys have fun without me." And the next day, I came into work, and one of the players who looked a little hungover, I said, "Hey, how long were you guys playing till?" And he went, "Brandon told me to tell you that we stopped at 1 a.m. And I was like, "When did you really stop?" And he goes, "I think it was like at 4 a.m."
Yeah.
And I was like, "Yeah, okay."
Yeah, and it's hard to put it down.
Yeah, well,
Very hard to put down.
my background is in gaming, game design, writing. I worked in the tabletop business in the 90s, and then I got into video game development, both as a designer and as a writer in the early 2000s. And then I worked on a couple of AAA games. So the last one I worked on was a game called Evolve, which I loved and we all put a lot of hard work into. And then sometime right after Evolve released, because Dungeons and Dragons has been a hobby of mine ever since I was a teenager. It always bugged me that I would run a game for my friends, especially at work, and none of them would ever step up to run. None of them ever wanted to run the game, because D&D is not like a normal board game. Somebody has to volunteer to go be the dungeon master and sit behind the screen and figure all this stuff out. And when I was a kid, everyone wanted to be a dungeon. All the other players would all want to play. And my friends would say, "Well, I can't do what you do. Like, you're really good at this and it's hard." And I'm like, "No, I'm not that good at it, A, and it's not that hard, B." And so I started a YouTube channel, which was literally just me saying, "Hey, here's what I know about running Dungeons and Dragons, and you can do it, and it's easy and it's fun." And it took off. And so now that's what I do basically for a living. I was able to quit my job, and we make YouTube videos about mostly Dungeons and Dragons, and that builds this audience. And then we make D&D products and sell them to that audience. So that's my kind of prehistory. Music has always been a huge part of my life. I actually think my journey into modular probably technically started with the movie Blade Runner, because that music, that soundtrack really hooked me. And I spent the next 10 years, most of my teenage years, looking for music like that, but with a beat.
Yes.
And it was out there, but I could not find it because I was a suburban kid in Southern California. And it wasn't until bands like Underworld came along. And there's a great show, which is still ongoing. It started in the early 90s, called Metropolis on a local public radio station, KCRW. And it was all of this like cutting edge trip hop, ambient, drum and bass stuff that I couldn't hear anywhere else. And that's when I was like, oh, this. So a lot of my friends, they thought of me as the guy that likes progressive rock and Genesis and Yes and Rush and all those kind of classic 70s groups. Yeah. But at the same time, I was huge into this electronic music. And so that's always been a part of my life.
No, that's really interesting, because I was a huge Vangelis fan when I was a kid. I was heavily into instrumental music before I discovered girls and discos and all that kind of thing that drags you in a different direction. Perhaps in my preteen years, I was heavily into Vangelis, Jean-Michel Jarre, bands like Sky, all that arena of stuff. And the sound, I mean, funnily enough, this was before I'd seen Blade Runner, obviously before Blade Runner was a thing, because it hadn't been invented yet. But very much into the China album by Vangelis. It had this sumptuousness to it.
That's gorgeous.
That I could listen to constantly, which I didn't know anybody else who listened to any sort of music like that. And similarly, it would then stay in the background when other things, got into indie, pop, indie, grunge, folk was my trajectory. But all the time, there's this sense of synthesizer music in the background, always going back to the classic 80s pop stuff, as well as looking for soundtrack, enjoying soundtrack music, from different places.
I watched a great documentary called Synth Britannia, which was right before I started getting into modular. And what I didn't know was that a lot of that 80s new wave synth music came out of kids who wanted to be punk rockers, but couldn't even play that badly. But what they could do was they could get one of these kits. They couldn't afford a synth, but they could afford a kit, and they would put it together, and they could use sequencers, and they could learn a couple of chords, and then they were a band. And that's how bands like the Human League got started. And I'm like, I didn't know any of that stuff. I thought that was fascinating. So yeah, I thought that stuff, it's interesting how what seemed to me this very complex music was being played by kids that thought of themselves as being basically illiterate musically. And I'm like, oh my God, that's fascinating.
Yeah, they'd play the black notes and, just very simple.
Exactly. Just play the black notes and it'll sound great. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, the whole Gary Newman thing, he discovered this dusty old crappy Moog sitting up in the studio that they were using, and he pulled it out and played some notes on it, and that somehow became the signature sound of the band. It is extraordinary.
And a lot of that 80s. Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, and it kind of demonstrates that it's not musical prowess. It's not what we're talking about in electronic music. Hardly ever.
No, I mean
it can be a factor, and there are artists who nail that kind of thing. But I always find it encouraging that it's mostly just people having a go, and sometimes it sticks,
Well, I remember watching, I think it might have been I Dream of Wires, but there was another documentary that got into the origins of musical synthesis, and those two schools, the East Coast and West Coast, Don Buchla on the West Coast and Robert Moog on the East Coast. And like Buchla lost, like Bob Moog won that kind of format war because he attached a keyboard to his synth, because he wanted to sell them to people. And there was a great interview where all the guys from like the music tape building in San Francisco, the West Coast folks were like, we felt like we had invented a new way of making music that didn't have anything that normal people could do. People that had no background in music or music theory could make music with this. And they felt like attaching a keyboard to it was death. That putting a keyboard meant now it's normal Western tonalities and it's all the music theory that you hated in high school or college or whatever. And that's kind of how I got into modular. Was I took, when I was in college and high school, I took piano lessons, I took guitar lessons, and I just hated it. I just never fell in love with the instrument. And modular for me, there's a great quote from Brian Eno where he talks about how sequencers made it so that you could replace skill with taste.
Ooh.
And now it was your taste of building a sequence, or even listening to random sequences and going, wait, what was that? What was that?
Yes.
And your judgment regarding which bits to keep and which bits to throw out that now allowed you to make music. And that was like 100% me. That was my in. And now, of course, I'm fascinated. I'm getting more and more into music theory. Now I watch a lot of a YouTuber named Rick Beato, Rick Beato, all he does, his whole channel is just music theory, only about 10% of which I understand.
Well, it becomes about curation. You're somehow managing a machine which is creating music, and you're making decisions like if you like, as a producer, you're making those sorts of decisions and letting the machine do the hard work in generating the actual sound. It is interesting.
Yeah, which thank God, because
I love that level of accessibility that can give, even though it looks like a hell of a scary thing. It's remarkable.
Well, there's I think he's in chat. There's a great YouTuber who's one of the foundational YouTubers, along with you. His channel is Comparative Irrelevance, and he has a series called there's a couple of different videos on YouTube about this, the 3-module challenge, right? Yes, you've spent a lot of money and you have all these modules, but can you make music? Can you make music with just 3 modules? And he goes through a series of just literally combining every combination of 3 modules in his rack just to see what can I do with it. And, maybe nothing, or maybe it's not very musical, but every once in a while, something amazing happens, something incredibly musical and totally generative. And that was one of the things that made me go, I could do this. Like, look at that. He's just got 3 modules. And I would sit there reading his patch notes and only like 5% of it made any sense to me. But I'm like, technically, if I just hook up the same things the same way he did, won't it sound the same? Yeah. And the answer is no, it won't. There's actually quite a lot of very tiny adjustments that you can make that will make things sound, really different. And, but you can get, 80, 90% of the way there just following patch notes. And every time you do it, you learn something new.
No, absolutely. I mean, I find when I'm reviewing a module and I'm focusing on just this one thing, I might poke some other things into it to make it do what it does. But it's that focus brings out an enormous range of sound and versatility from this one thing that when I'm then playing with my larger rack, it never occurs to me to have that focus. I'm scattering here, there, and everywhere.
Yep.
So it is very interesting to work in a smaller vibe.
Absolutely. That's the kind of like the danger of buying more modules isn't that you're not going to use them or you're not going to have fun with them. It's just that you're never you need to spend time doing a deep dive into one module, because some of these modules are incredibly feature rich and also very fiddly. Like tiny little adjustments in some of these modules make huge differences in the sound. And I started with there was a YouTuber, still uploading, Remix Sample, who had a Mother 32, which I've got my Mother 32 here. I've got it racked in a 40 ms pod. Yeah. You did very. And you have the whole setup. You've got two different like big Moog racks over there, and I started with this, and I watched this guy making a video playing basically Vangelis music from Blade Runner with just this. And now it turned out, I didn't know this, it turned out it wasn't just this. He was going into a DAW and he had the Valhalla Shimmer plugin, which is this kind of classic shimmer. But so I got one. I actually spent like 2 weeks doing very little except watching tutorials about this semi-modular synth. And I was like, I think I'm just gonna. I went down to Guitar Center, which is a big box chain music store here in America. I went down to Guitar Center because they said they had one of these in stock, and I was the only person in the store that even knew what it was. Like the person I was buying it from was like, what is this thing? And I would have to explain it to them. And I took it home and I hooked it up, and I was able to make music in like 5 minutes, and I was amazed. But it didn't sound exactly like that guy's video. No. So I went and did some research, and I was like, oh, Valhalla Shimmer. So I went and I bought, this is kind of the make or break point for me with digital audio workstations, was I went and downloaded a free version of Probably Ableton, and I went and bought the Valhalla Shimmer plugin. And it sounded exactly like the video the guy made. It sounded almost exactly like Blade Runner music. And then the next day when I went to do exactly the same thing, I couldn't get the plugin to work. And I'm like, nothing has changed. I haven't done anything. Why is it not working now? And I didn't know, I knew just enough to be dangerous. I didn't know enough to debug that problem. And that was kind of, for me, the end of trying to use software for this kind of stuff. I'm all hardware. And every time I show my rack off to somebody, especially, in the most of my friends are video game developers, the first thing they say is, can't you do all this in software? And I'm like, yes. I mean, 98% of it, yes. But when I'm sitting in front of a keyboard, a computer, I don't feel like creating music. Like this keyboard has letters all over it. I'm a writer, so I want to use this to type and write and create fiction and stuff like that. And I'm not inspired to use a keyboard and mouse. Some people are, and some people do phenomenal things with it, but I am not inspired to make music when I sit down at the keyboard. But this thing is nothing but inspiration. Look at all these dials. Look at it's got all these dials and little plugs and stuff. You don't know what they do, and you switch noises. You're like, oh, that sounds terrible. And then you switch it back and you're like, oh, that's much better. I never flip that switch. Whatever that switch does, it sounds terrible. And you slowly learn over time. And that's another, for me, a huge part of this hobby is the fact that there's always something new to learn. Yeah. Every time I buy a module, I'll explore it for a while. I'll get frustrated because I don't immediately understand everything. And I'll look at the manual, maybe I'll go watch a video, make some more progress. But eventually if I get stuck, well, that's fine. I've got a whole bunch of other modules I can make progress on. And so for me, it's not only is it very tactile, and nothing really replaces that feeling of dials and knobs and switches and plugs. But it's also just, for me, it's just fun to learn new things. Yeah. And I don't know if this has been your experience, because you knew you were a professional music person for a long time, building music computers and making music. But for me, I don't think you can really get into this hobby without learning how sound works and why different waves sound the way they do and what an envelope is and what the difference is between a tone and a note. And suddenly now I'm listening to music and I'm like, oh, that's a saw wave. He's just got a saw wave through a filter. You kind of can't do it just by cargo cult thinking. You're actually going to learn how sound and music works.
Yeah, I think you're completely right. You can blunder around in the darkness, but it will frustrate you because there are certain things you have to do a little bit deliberately, otherwise you get nothing. It's like when you build your first row, if you like, your first bit synth voice, and it just doesn't sound anything like you'd expect it to. You've got 100 plugins that sound better than this. It's a weedy, weak, bleepy, or constant tone that you can't seem to do anything with, except to like change it like a signal generator. Is about your first experience of these things, and it's like, oh, this is all for nothing. It's all for nothing. But then
you freak out. You spend all this money, and it doesn't sound awesome immediately.
It doesn't sound awesome. And then you start learning. Yeah, but if I put this in here, that does that. And why is that? Oh, because it does that. But there's two things going on. You've got the audio. So I mean, if you've played guitar or something, you've run audio through guitar pedals. You know that an effect will have an effect on the audio. You know, that's fairly straightforward. But you're also dealing with control voltage, which is this wangy thing, this wave that's also in your system that's moving the knobs for you, alarmingly. You know, and so you've got these two things going on. One's giving you sound, one's giving you control, and both of them you've got to try to somehow get to grips with. And it's that puzzle of putting those bits together, I think, that's, you know, it uses all sorts of different parts of your brain.
Yeah, it does. It's both creative, and it produces like I love making generative ambient stuff. It's I'm kind of very basic when it comes to Eurorack. Every criticism that modular nerds have, I am that person. I love rings. I love rings into clouds. I think it sounds amazing. I do it all the time. I use them all the time. But there's also just a bunch of stuff to learn and challenge you. So not only am I creating music that, because I didn't compose it, I just kind of produced it into being, I can listen to as an audience member. And that has huge value to me. Some of the stuff I've created, I listen to all the time. But also, it's super fun problem solving. I don't know what it's like on guitar or piano, but problem solving a patch and trying to figure out can't I take the control voltage that I'm using for pitch and put it into the filter, and then every time the pitch is high, then the filter will be high and it'll create this kind of pingy, or do the same thing with the reverb. And whenever I've got or invert it, so anytime I have a low note, that low note's just going to get a ton of reverb, but only the low notes. And you're like, yeah, I think that would work. Now, how do I do that? Right? That? And so
I've got to buy another module. That's what I've got to do.
I've got to buy. Yeah, I should just buy another module. Yeah, that's what you think. You think if eventually, after spending, at least in my, like a small car's worth of money, you start to realize maybe I don't need more modules. I bet I could probably do it with what I've got. And I think I'm the same as you. One of the first modules I got was maths. Yeah. Which I got because people said you have to have it. And you'll notice it's not racked right now. But every time I pull this out of my rack, it's usually only a day or two later when I realize, well, I need maths again, because like it's just so, it really is an incredible utility module. Like the other day, I just wanted to scrub through my, I was tuning my quantizer, and I wanted to see if the notes were doing and really all I needed was some voltage that I could just arbitrarily turn to scrub through it. And I realized I had nothing in my rack that did that because I had taken maths out. And I just should have grabbed one of the outputs for maths in the dial.
I'm always surprised that there aren't more modules. Well, there probably are tons of modules that do that, but none that I'd ever come across. None that are sexy. You know, just to generate voltage doesn't seem to be interesting, because it's just it's a constant value as you turn the knob, and you always want to modulate. You always want voltage to be moving, when actually, as you say, maths has got a couple of knobs down the middle that you can turn that just generate voltage. It transposes stuff. Suddenly you're adding voltage to something else. It will just offset something, or you'll use it for testing. Yeah, absolutely. Although my maths is also out of the rack at the moment.
Yeah, I think that's sure why. So because I think there's definitely a lot of gatekeeping in modular. Well, I think there's less now because the hobby is getting more popular. But when I started, which was I guess 2018, late 2018, it was, if I asked questions, I was more than likely going to get not yelled at exactly, but heavily patronized, right? and it was there's people who they don't think you should buy a module just to make claps. They think you should put noise through an envelope with a filter, and there's your clap sound. What are you doing? And I'm like, I could do that, yeah, but I want a module that's fun to play around with. And so they say you got to get maths. And you're like, fine, I'll get it, which is the exact same experience you had. You're like, I guess just so people will take me seriously when I ask questions, I got to have a maths.
Yes.
Yeah. But then over time, you start figuring out what it's for, and you're like, okay, I get it. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, for me, it became envelopes was the first thing it became, because I had a mental block over what the hell an envelope was supposed to do, or where it fitted into the
where it fit in the chain. Oh yeah.
Yeah, into the chain. Where what was all that about?
Well, I tried. I think I did the classic, like an 8-year-old would have done better. I tried to put the audio through the envelope.
Yeah.
Right. I tried to put the audio through the envelope. It's like, no, don't do that.
Natural.
That's. Yeah. I think
it's completely natural. You should do that. Yeah, I mean, because you see it on a synthesizer. When you've got a synthesizer, it has, you got your oscillator. If it's laid out in a normal way, you've got an oscillator. And then you have a filter, and it's there on sliders or something. And not a filter, an envelope. And it's there on sliders.
Yeah.
And it looks just like the audio's going up through that and down again.
Yeah.
Which, of course, it is.
Yeah, and even sometimes on the keyboard, no, it's not. No, the keyboard layout makes it seem like this is the signal path of the audio, but no, that's not what's happening. That's not what it's doing. And then, like, just understanding, like, VCAs and what attenuators do, and then realizing that they're everywhere, realizing that, like, the volume control on everything you have inside that device, the audio is at 100% all the time.
Yes.
All this, and this knob is pulling it down, and then, but like kind of inverting it. And you're like, okay, now I understand how this works. And just the way modular changes how you see the world. Like now when I see somebody's car, their signal, I'm like, that's just a square wave. That's just a square wave. They're everywhere. And these are things that you wouldn't know at least for me, if I didn't get into modular. So it's always for me, a huge part of it is the learning experience and always having something new. Wes Fless says, how did you get into the hobby? It was that video from Sample Remix that YouTube, for some reason, the YouTube algorithm, maybe because I was listening to a lot of Tangerine Dream, a lot of like 70s Tangerine Dream and stuff like that, was said, hey, I think you'd like this video. And it was just a picture of the Mother 32 and a guy playing what was a multi-track. He had recorded several other tracks into his DAW, and then he was playing on top of that with a bunch of reverb from a plugin. But I didn't know that. I just thought this box made this amazing sound. And so I was like, let me see if I could figure that out. And so I started with a Mother 32. I spent about 2 weeks learning it. And then I noticed that a lot of my favorite patches, including a lot of patches from Comparative Irrelevance, a lot of my favorite patches online used clouds, which I only understand a little bit. And I went and looked up, what is this? What is Mutable Instruments Clouds? And I discovered that it had been discontinued like 4 months before I got into the hobby.
Yeah.
And I went, uh-oh. And I did not understand that it was, I think this is actually before there was a flood of third-party open source clones of clouds. So I thought, am I not going to be able to get this module because it's just gone forever? And there was one. I'm very lucky that I have 2 synth stores that are local to me, about an hour's drive away. Analog Haven is one of them, and Perfect Circuit is the other one.
Oh,
and Analog Haven, Perfect Circuit's great. And they're 2 very different stores. Like one of those stores is run by hipsters, and the other one is run by stoners. And that was very encouraging to me. Actually, is going to the stoner store.
Though. Yeah, that's our view of California anyway. That's
that's correct. Yeah, it's 100%. You just drive 30 minutes across town and you've gone from hipsters to stoners. And the fact that these guys who, they looked like they were all in like a grunge band, but they were all hyper proficient in this very technical hobby encouraged me and made me think that I could do it. And so they had a Clouds in stock. And I drove up there and I'm like, when am I going to be here again? This place is an hour away from where I live. And so that's when I bought a Maths and I bought a Bitbox at the same time because I felt like the Bitbox would solve, because it's a sampler, I could probably do a lot with it because I could load it up with, instead of trying to fabricate my own sounds, I could load it up with stuff. And that was the beginning. I spent too much money and got too many modules. But then I had a rack and they had a used Depfer, the 9U travel case, and that was a huge sticker shock. I was like, just the case is like $600, just the case, it doesn't do anything. And but it's basically indestructible, it's like it's a travel case, so you can load it up and throw it anywhere. So yeah, I tried VCV Rack, but I actually, before I started with VCV Rack, there's an iPad app which is a replication of like a Moog System 11 or something like that, or System 15,
the Model 15, Model 15,
yeah, that's
I think it is.
Yeah, and it was really cool. I played around with that app for a little while before I did anything else, before I got the Mother 32. But it's incredibly frustrating because you can only view a tiny little part of the synth at one time because it's an iPad app. There's this gigantic machine, and I felt like I've been able to make this work a little bit, but gosh, it'd be nice if I could see the whole thing. So I started with VCV Rack, but it came back to that issue of I don't feel inspired to create music with a keyboard and mouse. I don't want to take a mouse and drag it around to turn a knob. And I just want to plug these two things into each other. I don't have to click and drag. And for me, the user interface, it's a huge part. Presentation is part of design. The user interface is a huge part of the experience. And there's just nothing like twiddling knobs and plugging in, patch cables.
Yeah, well, I think we've learned that in the last 10 years, maybe. I've spent an awful long time in the box, in the computer, because that was where the extraordinary developments were taking place. That's where the technology was moving, where the sound was coming from that I could have all of my Vangelis sounds in something like Omnisphere or some large synthesizer, and just enjoy that sound that was coming out of everything. And it took me a while. It's taken me a long while to discover that I need more than this. I need this way. There it goes. It needs more than that. I mean, how can everything be going through that single point of light? How can I express myself? It just seems completely nuts. So it's very much about the interface. And I found a similar experience with VCV Rack in that this is great, but I don't feel the experimentation. If I knew what I was doing, then I could get it. Like building instruments in Reactor, if I think about it hard enough, I can do it. I can patch things together, or in Max DSP, or all those sorts of things. I can achieve that with some effort, but there's no experimentation. It's an exercise in overcoming frustration and doing things correctly, and that's not really what I found. So as soon as I started spinning out of the box, it was a cascade. It really seemed to happen quickly. I mean, at the time I was running performances every month in Norwich Cathedral, doing big worship services. And I ran visuals, I ran the music and all that within this sort of alternative worship space was the idea. And I did the first couple of years with a laptop, with a Microsoft Surface, of course, because that's what I use. Right. A Microsoft Surface, and I'd be triggering loops, triggering video, that kind of stuff. And then, I got then a little Launchpad controller, and I was doing it from there. Then, okay, that's a bit better. Then a Bass Station 2 it's more tactile, turned up. Yeah, then a Bass Station 2 turned up from nowhere doing a little bit of bass line. Then there was a circuit. So so my desk, or my altar, whatever it was gradually increasing. Yeah. And then a couple of months down the line, a Mother 32 turned up. And now I'm like, not only am I triggering loops, I'm now real time twiddling cutoffs and bits and pieces like that. And it just kept going. It just kept going. And the last one I did had 3 whole rows of modular. And I did a sermon on noise. I related the idea of noise to, I don't know, the sounds around us and spirituality and how we adept our way through the peaking of noise and how through noise we can actually make melody. Oh no, something like that. It was very profound.
That sounds amazing. Yeah, it sounds amazing. Yeah. I can see above you is the front plate, it looks like, for the Deckard's Dream.
Yeah,
how is your Deckard's Dream? How is your Deckard's Dream project going? Like, how far away do you think, from being done?
I think probably 3 or 4 days of actual work on it. So it's tantalizingly close, but can I free up that time? Can I? Heckers like. So I have done the main board. I have done the hardware board. So the 2 main motherboards that sit inside the box are done. What I need to do now is there's a small board on the back that hosts the USB ports, MIDI ports, audio ins and outs. So that sort of bit. There's a bit to do with the power supply. There's some random bits that go inside glue inside the case, a little fan, just bits and pieces that stick around the place to complete it. And then it's just a matter of the 8 voice cards. These are the things that actually make the noise, that got the oscillators on and stuff.
They have the oscillators on them.
Yeah. And they all go
into
the slots.
Do you have to build each of those?
Yeah. Well, I have to solder them.
Yeah.
So these are 8 identical ones.
I watched your entire video of you soldering all of the circuits onto that. I mean, there was dozens and dozens of them, and I was like, did it all? Have you tested it? Do you know that you got them all in the right place? Or is it not? Is the first time you're going to know that you saw? Because even if you got an A+ grade, you got 99%, that still means there's several of those little soldering points that you could have missed, and you won't know until you fire it up. That's crazy.
It is. No, it is completely nuts. I have asked a few times, I've sort of put the odd thing into the Facebook group saying, so is there an easy way to test it? And people say things about schematics and, meters.
A multimeter.
And oscilloscopes. And I go, but is there an easy way just to make sure this is going to work? So
you could get a multimeter and just check every soldering point. Yeah. But that would be almost as tedious as doing it in the first place.
I've done a little bit of that just to convince myself that my surface mount soldering in particular wasn't just a disaster. Right. So I've done a little bit of just checking, I think, where I think it's supposed to be. But no, I'm just going with it. I mean, in essence, it's not difficult. There's a lot of it, but the actual soldering and placement of things, you've only got you're following a list. I mean, I had a conversation a bit like this with Gertz from Erica Synths last week, and it was a little bit critical of my approach, in that I am flying blind. I am just following a list and I'm putting these things in and I'm soldering. And I have no understanding of what is actually happening. So when I hit a problem, like, I've got 2 diodes and I don't know which one goes in, I should know that, but I don't. So I ask on the Facebook group and they say, it doesn't matter, mate, just put it in, what you're talking about. So I have a lack of understanding, which isn't preventing me from building it, but there comes a point when I need to know more so that I can fix things if they go wrong, to have some kind of clue rather than just having a very expensive ornament.
Well, I mean, I'm not trying to bring you down, but if you fire that thing up, if you finish and you fire that thing up and it doesn't work, what are you going to do? Like, how are you going to figure out which of these millions of little, if it works, then you're going to feel amazing. You're going to feel like a genius. You're Albert Einstein. But if it doesn't work, how are you going to figure out which of these little, now we got to go test every single connection? That's going to be insane.
Yeah, well, there are some awesome people on the Facebook build group. I mean, I have been sort of openly critical of Black Corporation because I'm an amateur doing this, trying to get this done and finding it hard. And I should say, and I'm going to say this in the next video that I do, that's not Black Corporation's fault, because they never released it as a kit. They released it as a set of PCBs and a front panel and said, here's a really interesting project that you should go and see what you can make of. And so there never has been a complete kit or complete documentation. There's been photographs and advice and stuff, but you're supposed to be an engineer, doing a kit at this level. They thought,
normal people are not expected to do that. Yeah.
So I'm not their ideal customer, but they just thought it would be interesting to see how far I would get.
Well, I think you've gotten pretty far, and you've done your own your own music thing, modular. I've seen you DIY stuff
Yeah,
before. Did
yeah.
you DIY a Turing machine, or
I
am I
did.
thinking
That was my
something else?
first one. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And so it's not like you might be a novice, but it's not literally your first project. So
No, no.
we'll
No,
be,
I've done a bit of soldering.
yeah.
I mean, I was farting around with like a 20 quid soldering iron, and because I have a number of chips on my shoulders. I like to stack them up, and one of my chips is about giving it a go. Not having to have all the gear, not having, because I get frustrated with people who say, "Oh, you can't do that, mate. You need to have this. You must have fan extractors. I've got to have poison gas masks. I've got to have all this gear," and it's like, oh, that can't be true, because you keep setting this bar of entry too high, and we can't get in. I want to get in. I want to get in and have a play. And so I'm very much into trying to break those things down, with DIY, with modular, with all this stuff.
Yeah, there's always this tendency on the part of this is true, by the way, in game design, in lots of disciplines, where the people who know and who they've invested all the time and work and effort and energy to master these things, and that time has value to them. And so when they see someone else just trying to wing it, they get upset, because that sort of is a challenge to what they've done. And they want to imagine that you need to know what they know in order to do what they're doing. But it's like, nah, mate. It's like, go listen to David Bowie's interviews from the 70s talking about using synthesizers. And he's like, these were things that cost 30,000 pounds. And there would be one or two of them in all of London. And they came, when you bought one, it came with an engineer who would set it up for you and tune it. And you would be like, but what happens if we just screw around? What happens if we just screw around with these bits? They're like, no, don't do that. And like, oh, but I like the sound it makes. And that idea of just saying, I want to just try and do it. It can't be that hard. I just want to try and do it. And it actually reminds me a lot. This is such a,
yeah.
Yeah.
I say those experts are there precisely so that we don't have to be. They've done the work so that we can stand on their shoulders and enjoy that landscape that they've prepared for us, and they should be proud. They should be proud. And,
they should, yes. I think that it's not entirely unlike, it reminds me a lot of the whole DIY modular scene is not entirely unlike painting miniatures for like Warhammer or D&D, because it's this thing where you're going to spend the hours just going to fly by. You put some music on or you put a movie on, and you're just sitting there with this really tiny, often with magnifying glass, really tiny details. And if you wait until you really know what you're doing to get started, you will never get started. Right? You might as well just start soldering and see what happens. People younger and dumber than me have done it and succeeded. So it's got to be possible.
It's got to be possible.
So that was your whole philosophy about modular in general, was the reason your channel, from my point of view, the reason your channel is so successful is that you are incredibly frank about your low tolerance for poor usability. And there's a lot of modules that I think the people designing them are engineers, and they're not primarily focused on usability. And so you focus on stuff that is immediate and tactile, and it works. And you go and you get it and you plug it in, and it did something cool and you like it. And that makes it seem to the rest of us like we could do this. And hearing a voice, especially an experienced musician, hearing a voice saying it shouldn't be this hard, that module is dumb, look how complex it is, I could never make it work, this one's a lot easier, and this one's fun, it should be fun, was a huge encouraging voice for me.
Oh, great.
It's weirdly similar. Somebody in chat said, to sewing your own bras. I cherish my ignorance on the subject.
I can imagine that.
Yeah, that would be yeah, that would be very difficult. So yeah, I think that it's I think the thing that is the most discouraging is not how complex these modules are. It's just the cost. Like I'm lucky that I'm in a place in my life, in my old age, where I don't have kids to send to college. I can afford to get into this new hobby, but it's hard for me to recommend it as a hobby to normal people. Because the example I use, it's like playing Warhammer. If every miniature cost $300,
yes,
not $20, and you can get someone pre-painted it online for $30. No. You're going to build an entire army, and every one of these miniatures is like $200-$300, and that is rough. Yeah. It'll be interesting to see. Like, do you see the price of modular and the entryway coming down, because you have one of those one of the, what's that new
The Nifty
Create
case?
audio, the
Yeah,
Nifty case. Did you get one of those?
I did. I pimped it up a little bit. It's sitting there with a load of Erica synths, really posh stuff in.
Right.
Yeah, I mean that was.
I saw that.
because I've been quite a fan of it since I first saw it, thinking, because
Yeah.
I've thought this a lot, that someone needs to just come up with a case that's easy, because the case was the hardest. The hardest thing, the thing that was stopping me from moving forward was
Really?
I don't know how to buy a case, because every time I speak to someone about it, they say, oh, well, it depends on the power supply really and how many amps you need. Amps.
Oh,
I'd
God,
say,
yeah.
how many amps? Why would
Yeah.
I need amps? I mean, it's electrical. I understand that, but how would I know how many amps I need? What are you talking about?
I have never once worried about the power load in any of my cases, or I just assume that that since I'm not like it has sockets in it, and is that if I plug modules into those sockets, I presume it has power to power it, and I've never had a problem with that. So
No, well,
it
me
can be
neither.
intimidating.
Yeah, I mean, they made me worry about
But you don't
it.
know that when you get started.
No, I mean, they made me worry about it, so I would worry about it, but I wouldn't know how to answer the
Yeah.
question. So I would just have to plow on in. And so with the first row that I was putting together, I bought a vastly overspecified power supply that I understand now, simply because I didn't know what to do.
You didn't.
So I went bleh at it. And so I bought a Row Power 40, 4MS Row Power 40, which is their top of the range power.
Yep.
And it turns out that I can power my whole rack, really, with
just with
one
that.
of
Yeah.
those. But I didn't know at the time,
Yeah, and that's and you don't know, and that's why I thought the Creative or the Create Audio Nifty
That's it.
case seemed like a great, because not only was it a case, but it also came with a couple of, it looked like quasi usable modules, and I was like, this seems good to me.
Yeah, and it's also got it makes a good bridge, because it's got a MIDI input and a USB input, so you can, if you're too scared to go modular completely, you can attach a keyboard and you can play it like a little synth, and so it provides that safety net so you could have a keyboard based something with a couple of little modules, or you could have a synth that's also playing into it and you're using the modules to augment it. It has a couple of nice ways that, and you can use your modulation wheel on your keyboard to then send some CV through it. It's some nice touches that just make it easier. But then as I was doing the review on it, as I was sitting there talking about la 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 la, and I thought, so your next module then is going to be the same price as this whole thing. So from this point, you've got a great, good value system. Great, I've got in for a couple $100. Excellent. Now I'm screwed from this point on, because every single module after
it's
that
going to be expensive.
is going to double the price every time, and it's like, well, yeah, this is tricky, but at least you've got in at a reasonably good value step, and then you can decide whether you need to invest more in it or whether you'll just leave it as is.
Have you ever played around with any of Ladix, LADIK, any of Ladix modules?
No, somebody mentioned that to me the other day, oddly, and I went, no. But I understand it's good value. Is that?
I mean, they're pretty small. They're pretty narrow HP modules, and they're pretty cheap, and they look they have a high degree of utility. It's kind of like the Deptford range. There's not there's not a lot of really noodly multifunction modules, but they seem really cheap. The only problem I have is that I can't figure out the guy's website. It's not like a normal store, and so even though I sometimes find modules that seem like they're useful, how do I add this to my cart? I don't know. But people seem like Paul in chat seems to make it work. So I've often thought about doing a video on my YouTube channel about my experience with modular and kind of introducing it to people. And I stopped wanting to do that because Andrew Wong made a couple of really good Eurorack videos, and I was like, well, this is everything. I'm not gonna make a better video than this guy. His stuff.
He flipping nailed it in 7 minutes. 7 minutes.
Yeah, it was disgusting.
I sat there. I'd been sweating over a whole series of how to get started in modular, trying to explain one thing over and over again for hours. And he'd 7-minute video. Bam, and I just go, well, I've just learned everything I need to know about modular. That was phenomenal.
Yep. He's a really good music educator. Yeah. But one of the things I'd like to do is I'd like to see if I could, spend like $1,000 which is still a lot of money for, like it would have been a lot of money for me for most of my life on a hobby, just drop a grand. But actually, maybe even for less, put together something that makes something generative and has something like a Turing machine in it and has some effects modules in it that somebody could pick up and go, okay, it's my next module doesn't have to be $350 and it's Platts or whatever. It can just be, and there's, 2HP has a bunch of, pretty good modules. There's the Erica Pico series, the Lattice series are all, high utility value, low price. But then what happens is when you get a whole bunch of really tiny, cheap, narrow modules, it's impossible to patch it. It's impossible. All the knobs are tiny little fiddly knobs. And then it's not representative of the hobby, right? It's almost like I could just get rings and clouds and a Turing machine and be like, here, this is what you're probably going to be doing a lot of.
Yeah, no, I think that's true. But choice of modules is such a difficult thing to do, and everyone you speak to has slightly different ideas as to what's important or what grabs them and what it is that made you buy a particular module in the first place. I mean, I'm often trying to put out a fire or trying to fix a problem. So like I learned about switches, or a sequencer switch, because I just wanted to have a verse and a chorus. How do I achieve verse and chorus on this machine? And so I got a switch which enabled me to switch between two different sequences coming in,
Yep.
So I had to research that, work that out, and try to figure a way of purchasing the right module to make that happen. This is where something like Disting really comes in useful, because a completely impenetrable module like Disting is so multifunctional that you can find all sorts of things within it that show you, if only you had this, you could then do this, and that's
what I think that's probably the primary use case for the Disting is not you're going to depend on it to do this function. It's you're going to try out this function. I'm just going to try this out and see how this works. And then if it works, you've got it in the Disting, and as your need grows, well, now you can go get a specialized module that will do that. But otherwise, the Disting is just a great way to try lots of different modules. And now there's a new one.
There is
the Disting EX Alpha, I think is what it's called, because they named it after a Street Fighter video game.
Oh, did they?
Yeah, there's like, there was a whole series of Street Fighter video games, and the names got progressively more ridiculous.
And therefore super Disting.
Okay. And so the EX Alpha was actually like one of the last, I think, Street Fighter games. And they just thought that was funny, and that's how they named it.
Oz is more of a nerd than he lets on, you see, that's the thing. He has a cool demeanor which reduces his nerdism in the public face of his nerdism, but actually that goes really, really deep. That's good to know.
It does. And also, like, the new one's got a screen. It's got like a real screen, like not just a couple of lights that confuse the hell out of you. Yeah. And I think that's going to make it hugely useful. Yeah. So it'll be interesting to see how that goes. So I'm always kind of interested in trying to find a way to, because I do these live streams that are, nerd D&D focused, and we play video games every once in a while. And I like to always have a new patch for every stream, which means 2 or 3 times a week, I'm trying to put something together. And people are, these are people that don't know anything about modular synthesis. In many cases, they're not musicians, they don't play music, or they do, and it's even more baffling. They're like, how do you use that thing? How do you play it? And I just wish there was a way to do it simply and cheaply. And isn't there, who is it that's making is it Dreadbox that makes the kind of these neon colored modules pretty cheaply?
Yeah, Dreadbox have had a couple of goes at doing sort of value range of modules, and they're someone will tell us in chat, the Kaleidoscope range, no, color something, color wheel range,
like Hydrasynth or something. No, color wheel range. That's a good way.
They've got quite a lot of good functionality packed into these individual modules. They're quite cookie cutter, so they look very similar, other than the
well, that's how they keep the cost down, right? Is that
exactly.
They're using a lot of the same parts.
Yeah, but they've put some interesting functionality in there to make them slightly more interesting, because their white line range, which was a similar value range, were just a bit too simple. So you'd have an envelope, an oscillator, a filter, I suppose, and nothing else going on. So you'd had to still build it out with utilities, because it's the utilities that make everything work, funnily enough. Yeah. Otherwise, it's a very dull experience.
I'm surprised at how many people will recommend for newbies, for new people, who will recommend stuff like the Behringer Neutron. And there are other things in that range, or of that ilk. And I'm like, but there's no sequencer. like a new person needs something to generate like discrete voltages so that they can create, even if it's generative, so that they can create melodies. And so that's the thing that always surprises me, is because I use sequencers for everything. I use sequencers to sequence the filter levels. I use sequencers to sequence all sorts of stuff.
That's where the Mother 32 had its sweet spot, because it had all of those things. You know, it had a keyboard, for heaven's sake, on the front. You know, you could play it, you could make a sound. And because I mean, at the time,
it's immediate.
Yeah, because at the time that I bought my one, I was also considering the Erebus from Dreadbox.
Oh yeah, Dreadbox,
the No Coast as well, which I did buy accidentally at another point. But it was the Mother 32 was just the whole package, and at the time I definitely saw it as a gateway, as a step into modular, because you had a synth. First of all, it had flipping Moog written on the back, and then you had this patch bay that you could use or not. You didn't have to use it. You know, if it was too scary, I could just stay over here with me wobbles and me bass notes. And it had the sequencer that I couldn't understand, but I could get it. I could save at least one thing in it and go with that, and variations. And that was and
plus it'll transpose, like you can have the sequencer playing and just hit a note, and it will shift the entire sequence up to that note, which makes it sound much more musical. Right now you feel like you're playing it. You can have movements within it. I remember when I bought my Mother 32, I had no idea what 98% of the, like, maybe there was 1 or 2 patch bays that I understood. And then I played around with it. I got into other modules, and I came back to it like maybe 6 or 7 months later. And suddenly I knew what everything did. I'm like, oh my God, now I know what all these things mean now. I've actually learned things. I've actually made progress. So it's also got that classic ladder, that Moog ladder filter sound, which I mean, I used it for a while just for that filter. I would just pass audio into it and control the filter. So that's, for me, that's the only downside to this hobby, is I love talking about it, and I love introducing people, because my audience does not overlap with modular synthesis at all. And so they're just constantly fascinated by it. And I love explaining it, because for me, explaining this stuff helps me understand it. So I regularly have to kind of stop and just explain it to people. Yeah. The key step is really good.
Yeah. I mean, the fact that I run a YouTube channel talking about this stuff is exactly how I've enabled myself to remain creative somehow and keep my enthusiasm, enjoying this. If it was just me, I think, having a look at this, I wouldn't have gone anywhere near as far. But because I have this weird desire to open things up and explain things, it's that explanation that suddenly makes me realize what the heck all this stuff is doing and how awesome that is. And it keeps this level of engagement up for me. You know, it just seems to be the way that I can tie myself into something. So it is, it's the explaining of it. If I have to explain it to somebody, that's how I get to learn it. You know, and so actually you're all doing me a service by watching what I do, because it's just allowing me to teach myself something, you know.
Plus, it's just exciting to share what you've learned with people. Like every time I make some kind of breakthrough, and a lot of my breakthroughs are incredibly rudimentary. Every time I make some kind of breakthrough, I'm like, oh, I want to share this. I want to show this off. I want to share this with people. And just there's, I'm not a musician. A lot of the logic behind what these modules are doing does not come naturally to me. And so sometimes I discover something super, super obvious, but I immediately want to share it with people. So I'm lucky that I have an audience that puts up with it.
Yeah. Something you said earlier, actually, that I've just reminded of, is the difference between sharing with modular, different to an instrument. What am I saying? I'm saying that you don't really see on YouTube guitarists going, oh wow, look, I've just learnt this new chord, and streaming it on the internet. Whereas a modular person going, I've just made this extraordinary sound, listen to this, happens all the time, because you're not showing your talent. You are showcasing the fact that this machine is making an awesome noise. Look at that. And I had something to do with it, possibly, but I'm just going to sit here and let that play because that was amazing. And that's
also it's
a fundamental
fun
difference.
And you have the opportunity to kind of challenge how people view the technology, because like if you sit down with a guitar, everyone knows what it's going to sound like, right? And so they're just kind of waiting to see your creative output. But when you sit down with a modular synth, people have no idea what to expect. They're fascinated, but they probably imagine kind of 8-bit Nintendo sounds coming out of this thing. And I picked up a Odessa, the Chaos Odessa, which is this kind of multi-harmonic complex oscillator. And you can patch the Odessa, you can play around with that thing for, weeks, and it never sounds the same twice. And I had a friend of mine come over. She knew nothing about any of this stuff, and she started playing around with it, and it started making bird song. It started making these beautiful, organic, natural sounding Twitter sounds. And she was blown away. She had no idea that these machines could make these beautiful organic sounds. And I didn't either. I was just surprised as she was. I was like, I didn't know it could do that. That's amazing. So yeah, that's a big part of the process for me. What kind of what is next on your list when it comes to modules that you're planning on getting, or new stuff that you're excited by?
I have a backlog which worries me, in that I have a few modules that I haven't really played with to their fullest yet. I haven't dug into, and sometimes with a module you just don't find it, and so you put it to one side, and maybe you'll lose it or sell it or pass it on somewhere. But with other things,
or come back to it later and go, oh, now I get it. That happens to me all the time.
Yeah, no, that may well happen. So one module as example is Bloom. I've got from Qubit. I have a Bloom. I've always found their modules fascinating. I've never been able to get them to send me one, so I had to, put my hand in my pocket and buy one. And Bloom.
What did you think of the Bloom?
I don't know, because it doesn't do anything that I thought it would. I keep thinking it will play miraculous tunes, and I've watched some interesting videos of people making miraculous tunes with it. But for me, it's kind of making very dull tunes at the moment, and I'm sure it's not the fault of the module, it's the fault of the user at the moment, and I need to give it a bit more time. So
the Bloom is weird. It definitely you have to take it on its terms, because it doesn't behave like any other sequencer.
No, so I haven't spent the time with it yet, so it's sitting there mocking me from the rack at the moment. but as we're moving forward, I mean, for the development of the music I'm attempting to make, I suppose I need distortion, I need some more effects, and I think I'm looking at the moment very deeply at Casper Electronic stuff, the stuff Peter Casper does for Bastl. There's a couple of modules in there that are just grimy, gritty, interesting sound mangling bits. So I want to get into a bit of that, less noise, more just fattening and grunging, I think. So a bit of that.
That's cool.
What was the other thing?
There's always something, right? There's always something on the horizon.
Yeah, percussion is the other thing that I'm very interested in at the moment, because trying to find drum sounds is difficult. I've had a Pico drums for a long time. There's a new Pico drums that was announced today, which is very different, but interesting. But trying to find a drum sound, I mean, as you said earlier about actually making your own drum sounds, that seems like an awful waste of HP to have like a noise or an oscillator and then an envelope and then a filter and all of these things just to create a or a, that's a lot to do all of that. Yeah. But at the same time, Befacco have got this Perkle module. They've sent me a kit of that to build. Oh yeah, I saw that. A 4-channel thing which does exactly that. What it takes, you stick a noise in, any sort of sound in, and it puts all those envelope bits and pieces around it to create percussive type noises. So that might be interesting. But I haven't successfully mastered the drum kit element of the system yet, and that's something I'm pursuing a bit of, I think, at the minute.
And I can tell you, I've become a huge fan of the WMD drum modules. They have a Crater, the Crucible. There's one or two more, and they are relatively small HP. And their algorithms that they use to generate these sounds are amazing. Like I find there are several modules, like Rings is a good example of this. I love Rings, but there's only a couple of different settings on Rings that sound good, right? There's all these dials, but not all of them sound pleasant. Some of them actually sound really weird. And why do you want the module to do that? But the WMD percussion series, everywhere you put it sounds amazing. And I love modules like that. I love modules where you feel like you can't screw up. So I saw that you were kind of interested in the new mini Bitbox.
Well, only in as much as I can imagine myself using that one more than the big one. The original ones, they just seemed a little bit touch screeny. That seemed to be the focus of it, as opposed to anything else. I mean, funnily enough, I do have a sampler. I have the Sample Slicer, Sample Slicer 2. They
really?
released
Okay,
that.
yeah.
That was probably 2 years ago now. It was a Kickstarter that I got onto. It's still in the bag. I bought the kit version, and I have not found the time to put that together. But I mean to. I definitely aim to at some point. And that, I think, could be interesting. Because, I mean, the thing that's missing from my musical palette is probably a Rhodes piano. I like that sound very much. Whenever I do anything, there's always ends up with that kind of tinkly sound in it. So to bring in either something a bit paddy or a bit Rhodesy, I can see that as being
the Rhodes is classic.
Enjoy, you know.
Yeah.
So
the Rhodes, you're talking about the Rhodes electric piano that like Stevie Wonder and like Herbie Hancock used.
The
that
beginning
thing sounds
of
amazing.
Riders of the Storm, you know.
Yeah, exactly. Oh yeah,
that
classic.
Sort of thing.
Yeah. Well, I was really like the Bitbox is insane in that the sample slicing thing it does, where you can like I have a bunch of samples from the Mellotron, like the original Mellotron sounds, but it'll be like one MP3 is all of the cello sounds and just all the different pitches. And I was able to make it work on the Bitbox by slicing it up and then setting it different voltages, and it sounds like I'm playing a Mellotron, and I thought that was pretty amazing.
Yeah, that's
so
cool.
It'll be interesting to see if the new smaller Bitbox is popular, because they're doing a lot with that form factor, right? They've got that black box, which is a kind of completely independent off-board like MIDI triggering thing, but it's the same form factor as the Bitbox.
Yeah.
That
They
stuff's
do
crazy.
keep changing the innards a bit though, so I'm not so sure how. I was always assumed that they were forwards and backwards compatible, but that's not quite the case, because with each one they develop it and then it doesn't necessarily move in that direction. But I mean it doesn't seem to be my vibe. It's not my bag, man, but I can see how it can be for certain people. But as I say, the Micro could be.
Yeah, and it looks like it's almost as fully featured as the old one. So that seems like it's a good deal. I remember you got a Magneto. You were talking about getting more effects, and you didn't like it.
No, it's not that I don't like it. No, it is.
You don't want to say you didn't like it.
I don't know, because it's a beautiful thing, man. It's like a work of art type module. So I can appreciate it at that level. Essentially it's a tape delay. Now a tape delay means to me normally a plugin that says tape delay. And so what happens is you put that plugin in and you get a delay like you expect to. You know, having been a long time guitarist, I get a delay pedal. If it says tape delay or digital delay, I don't care. I press stomp on it, I press my guitar and I play like the Edge. That's what I do. That's what I want to do, and that's what I do. And so when I go to modular, I kind of expect the same thing. And you often get that with delay modules, but not with Magneto.
Yeah.
Because it's actually working like a tape delay is supposed to. And a tape delay just screws with your head, because it's not really delaying. It's recording a little bit and then it's going around on a loop.
It's looping. Yeah,
and then it's playing it back at certain points. And you're going, but what? Where am I putting these heads and how long is my tape? And I'm getting really bound up in concepts and ideas that I just want it to go bang, 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 bang.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. Well, the Mimeophone is really good for that. And in fact, I think a lot of people who bought Magnetos would have been happier if they had gotten a Mimeophone that came out later. But I love the Magneto. I never use clouds anymore. The Magneto. It's because it's also got basically a lo-fi junkie built into it. You can make these really amazing lo-fi sounds with tape and crinkle and wow and flutter and all that stuff.
Well,
let me ask you a question.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, but that's the thing, is these modules are so personal. Each module, each manufacturer has its own unique kind of attitude toward patches and knobs and what they should do. And so it's really easy to get a module that will 100% do what you want, but you can never crack the code of it. It doesn't work for your workflow, and workflow is so personal. And all modular does is make it even more personal, because it's just a question of how you string these unique modules together.
Yeah.
So how did you go from being a kind of, I think of you as both a musician and sort of like an engineer, in that you build sound PCs for audio PCs for people. You're a big proponent of using the Surface, which is also my laptop of choice, as a Surface Pro. It's a fantastically built machine. How did you originally fall into modular?
Well,
What was it that you saw that made you go, "This is down. I'm down for this"?
Yeah. Well, it was really quite dull, I suppose. I was writing for Gear News. The computer business has all fallen away now. For people who are after an audio PC, I'm sorry, I have a series of videos on it that I downloaded my knowledge of audio PCs into a series of videos. Go and watch those. I no longer want to answer questions on it. But I got a gig writing for Gear News, which is a website that talks about all sorts of...
I read all your stuff on Gear News.
Ah, cool. I started off writing about audio interfaces and DAWs and bits of software because that's my field. And then the guy said, would I mind writing about synthesizers? And I said, yeah, sure, I can write about Reactor and Venom and Reason and things like that. He said, no, yeah, hardware synthesizers. And I went, oh, yeah, of course. So
sure. Yeah, I know all about them.
Yeah. I mean, I do have a history of synthesizers. I used to work in a music shop. We used to sell synthesizers. I used to look after the synth department for a period of time. I was dusting off things like Kawai K5000s and JP8000s and Quasimizi Ravens and all that kind of Korg Tritons. You know, the terriblest, worst era of synthesizers, which was the late 90s. That was that was what I was looking after. And so, I've got a fair idea about these things. So I thought, well, I'd probably better go and find out stuff about it. So I went to Synthfest, which was a show up in Leeds in 2015, I think it was. And I was just reminded, I think, because I mean, I've played on a lot of synthesizers in shops, but I was very much reminded of what that feels like. And I was able to sort of hop from table to table, just playing. Like I played on an O-Coast and made a nice sound. I played on something else, made a nice sound, and enjoyed myself at every table. And just playing with little desktop synths, little hardware synths, and thinking, yeah, this is great. I can do this. I can talk about this. And then I walked up this strange avenue where people had brought along their own little modulars. And I thought, this is weird. Now, I remember this from... I used to have to go to the Frankfurt Music Show in Frankfurt for work, because I was working in a music shop, and we had to go to trade shows, and that's one of the things I went to. And the original Super Booth was there, which was mostly dope for stuff. Right. And it was all twinkly, all silver, all twinkly, all unintelligible. And I was just walking through it on my way to the software booths. And but I remember it being there and how kind of vaguely interesting that was. So seeing this stuff again, I thought, this stuff still knocks around. That's cool. And so I had a little poke and sort of, and then I got talking to Chelsea Bruno, or Eden Gray, who I spoke to on this program the other week, and she just sort of unraveled this little row of modular and just talked to me about this, that, and the other as she was patching stuff in, and it was making this sound, and I'm going, that's amazing. How are you doing? Okay, there's a filter, yeah, all right, and it just made this sound, and it changed and it evolved, and she was absent-mindedly plugging things in and taking things out, and I thought, this was flipping amazing. What is this? I better take some notes. Flipping amazing. So
it is
yeah. And then later that day there was a seminar run by DivKid and a few other luminaries who I had no idea who they were, talking about it, and I sat there and listened to this thing. I thought, I haven't got a clue what they're talking about, and it sounds exciting. It does sound interesting. They were talking about power supplies and problems with things and engineering, this, that, and the other, and control voltages. And I go, wow. So anyway, I was enthused and enlightened by this whole event. And then in the evening, I went to see a gig, and it was Blancmange were playing, and it's just sort of rounded off the whole thing as a fantastic experience. And I went home and I wrote about it, and I continued to write about it, and then I just researched for months, looking into this stuff, thinking this is amazing. I mean, this is also during this time when I was spilling out of the computer. So I had an Ovation circuit, I had a base station, I had a launch pad.
Right.
I hadn't yet bought the Mother 32. That was the next stage. And so I was already in this, I'm migrating out of the computer, and this is fabulous. I'm really having a good time. And I'm suddenly gone from zero creativity and having an album that I hadn't done anything on for a couple of years, through to, wow, this is all happening, I'm writing so much music now, this is fantastic, it's all just coming out.
That's awesome.
Yeah. And it was that, really. And then it was thinking, I don't understand this, how can anyone understand this? and I need to make a decision on what my career is doing. Am I still building computers that nobody seems to really want anymore? Or do I find some other interesting thing to do? And I've been making videos on the Surface, and that was interesting because I like the interface. I like the potential for creativity in that. I was doing the interesting things with that. Digital pen, I like that. I like touching things. I could tell that all of this was taking me away from the mouse, which seemed to be my nemesis. All of these sorts of things all happening together. And I thought, well, sod it, I'll do a video on this modular stuff because I can't find anything easy on the internet about it. So there could be a bit of space for me to bring a story to this community. I mean, there's a massive community. There just wasn't any easy information. And that's what.
No, it's there was, like I said, there was a lot of gatekeeping. But I remember one of your very first videos. You talked about how you didn't know anything. None of the Eurorack stuff was familiar and clear. So you just wrote to a lot of the manufacturers.
Yes.
And you were amazed. That a lot of them wrote you back, and they were like, "Oh, you want to try this, and you want to get one of these." And I think that shows just how small this community is that these people they all know each other. They want you to get into the hobby. They want you to start going down that road.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And they were, on the most part, just totally wonderful. And that really did encourage me along. There's one guy that I spoke to who he works at a distribution, a music tech distribution that I used to buy audio interfaces from when I was building computers. And I had a conversation with him about something or other, and I just happened to mention, I'm just really looking into this modular thing. Do you know anything about it? You got any recommendations? Because I knew that they also distribute Moog, and I thought, well, maybe I could get something cheap from him. I think I was probably after a Mother 32 thinking about it. And he came back, gave me this huge long thing. But of course, he turned out to be Marlon Melodies.
Oh, I knew it as soon as he was talking about distributing Moog. Yeah, because he's their rep. He's their rep in the UK.
Rep, exactly. And I had no idea, of course. So I'm just babbling on like some idiot. Yeah, do you know anything about that? And he's like, one or two things.
That's Mylar Melodies is obviously a huge inspiration for I think that guy probably sold like 80% of all of the Metropolises in circulation come from that guy's one video where he pitches it, and suddenly people are like, this thing's amazing.
He does great stuff in that case. In that, you've watched some of his making his techno case videos are just brilliant.
Yeah, it's every time I watch one of his videos, I learn something new. I don't know. I often don't know how to apply this stuff to what I'm doing or what I'm working on, because we don't learn things because we're all doing this catch as catch can. We don't necessarily learn things in the order that we need to use them. You go, oh wow, it's amazing how you use these sequential switches to create this effect. I don't know when I'm ever going to do that, but that's part of the fun, is making these connections. And that's what makes it creative, is that kind of problem solving. Like, wait, I remember I watched a Robin Vincent video. I think I can make this work. So what were your that stuff.
What were your first modules then to bring it back?
Well, like I said, I had my absolutely first module was the Mother 32, and I probably could have stuck with that for a couple of months. But because I was afraid that clouds, which I like the way clouds sounds. Like I said, I'm kind of basic when it comes to this stuff. I was afraid that I was going to not be able to get one, so I went out and bought a bunch of modules. It was clouds, it was a Bitbox. I think I might have got a Plonk, which I still Plonk is another one that like. Yeah, Plonk is great. It's great for a lot of different sounds. But it's another one where you sort of gotta like spend a lot of time with it to really unlock everything it can do, because you can create new samples from it. It's not a sampler. You can create wholly new sounds from it, and that is pretty daunting. But the presets sound great, and I think sometimes I like playing with the presets, and sometimes I want to just make a new sound from scratch. And so Plonk is great for that, but it's another one of those modules where it does way more than I've ever used it for. And you feel guilty. You feel guilty when you your eye catches on some new module, and you're like, but I've got so many modules that I don't really get full value out of yet. But yeah, I think I got a Plonk. I don't remember. And some of the early patches I put together were very complex. They had movements within them. They had like a part 1 and a part 2 and a part 3. And then I slowly over time just started to hyper focus on like generative stuff and understanding randomness and how to use randomness to create things that could play for an hour and be in the background while I'm working and just constantly surprise me. And now I'm starting to get more into trigger sequencers and rhythms and stuff like that. Like you sold me a Vermona random rhythm, which I quite like.
Yes.
And I probably would use that for everything I needed as far as rhythms go. But I think I prefer grids. I think it's easier for me to get something good out of grids. But I've got both, so who knows? Yeah.
I think with random rhythm, you really need to focus on the dice rolls. That's where it shines. Otherwise, you seem to end up making polkas or marches or something quite structured. Well, unless you swing it. Swing it is the other thing it does quite well. But yeah, it kept my attention for a good time, But then I can't seem to. Yeah, it doesn't. Yeah, when I need another clock, I use it. It's a good clock divider and things like that. But that seems to be under.
I think one of the first modules I got was Pamela's new workout, and that is still by far like the most used module. And in use PAMS for I think what a lot of people use maths for. I use PAMS as an envelope generator, as a source of modulation. I use it for randomness. I use it for just everything, and it still does even more. Like it, I was reading on Muffwiggler. Somebody was talking about how it does. It does Euclidean circles. It does Euclidean rhythms, which is nice. But I've got other rhythm generators. But you can give it you can just give it some CV. And you can tell it that the number of steps or the number of beats in your rhythm is based on the input, and you can use just a dial, which I haven't tried yet, but I'm dying to try it. Just a dial to increase the number of steps in your sequence. And how awesome is that? Like, so that's another thing I just learned. I've had PAMS for 2 years, and I just read that, and I was like, I can't wait to try that. That's going to be a lot of fun.
See, that's another one of those modules that I can't see past the front, if you know what I mean. I know
it's super menu divey.
It's something that everybody has, and I know is incredibly useful. And I've only got so much space in my head, I think, and so I've ignored it, and I'll just keep ignoring it for now. And see, it's probably doing something really vital that I need, and I don't know it yet.
It can be frustrating with PAMS because I've gotten to the point where I basically understand what it does, like intuitively, but I want to go to this parameter and I want to set this parameter to another value. And that means I've got to go click, 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 dial, 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 click, dial. And that can be frustrating because that's the trade-off is it's so small and it packs so much stuff into such a small space, but you end up with this tiny little LED screen. So I keep wondering if there's going to update to PAMS, like a PAMS next workout or something like that. But
they've done a lot of new modules recently. ALM have come out with quite a few new bits and pieces. So you wonder whether now they've bumped those out, perhaps there's room for something under there.
Yeah, we'll see. I think some of those new modules from ALM look amazing. So I'm keen to see people using them. I have to see people using modules before I can pull the trigger to buy one, because I'm terrified. I don't know what for me is next. I'm pretty happy with the selection of. I have a ridiculous number of modules, many of which I don't use, but I have had my eye on the spherical wavetable navigator for a while, because it makes such incredible sounds, but also the LFOs built into it just seem like a unique combination of utility. So I'm sort of
interesting one.
Curious about that. I'm also vaguely interested in the Chord version 2. I like Qubit's modules. I have a chance. The Qubit chance is in a lot of my patches. It's such a phenomenal source of randomness, and including like rhythms and stuff like that. It does. So
I think I can easily see a Qubit row because they're quite beautiful as well. At least I like the black. I have to say the earlier colours not so much, but their black range. They're all interesting. They're all slightly bizarre, slightly strange.
Yeah.
But interesting digital modules, and so they bring a certain way of doing things, a certain workflow, and different way of doing things than some of your standard analog
Well,
stuff.
I just saw somebody use the Nebula. Now we're just talking. Now we're just talking about whatever. But I saw somebody use the fact that the Qubit Nebula has kind of an open source architecture, and they updated it so that now. This is crazy to me because I noticed when I got my Nebula that it's got some kind of like universal I/O board on the back of it. It's got like HDMI out for some reason because it's just some generic thing they bought. It's some off the shelf input output module that they bought and slapped on the back of their thing, but it's got Wi-Fi. And so now there's a third-party firmware update where you can have your Qubit Nebula in your rack and you can send it samples over Wi-Fi.
Nice.
And that is insane to me. That's far outside my comfort zone. I can't imagine me loading up some kind of third-party. I'm guarantee you I would screw something up. Loading third-party... Yeah, it is. As Synth Anatomy says, it's just a Raspberry Pi. Yeah, it's just a Raspberry Pi. So I think that's phenomenal. I can't wait for Qubit to do something like that and say, here's our official interface for it. And yeah.
Yeah, well, they need to build Ableton Link into it or something of something phenomenal.
I think they could.
Like that, yeah. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of talk at the moment about cross communication. How do you get all these things into it? Yeah, because I mean, in our postmodern way, we'd like to include everything. So rather than going fully modular or fully DAW, you don't have to go DAWless. I think a lot of the looking around at the moment is trying to find how do we bring these things back together? Because there's a lot of people who have gone desktop, lots of little boxes, and going, how do I make all these work together again? Oh yeah, that's why we invented DAWs and sequencers,
MIDI.
was to run all this gear. I was like, oh right, okay. So there's a lot of interest in trying to corral it back in again, and I'm finding that quite interesting. I'm going to do a bit of writing on that, I think.
I sort of feel like compositionally, I'm at a point where a lot of the stuff I want to do would just be easier to do in a DAW than it would be to try to figure out how to do with modular. And so even though I started off being really turned off by the entire the kind of impenetrable nature of something like it, if you're a writer. Like, for me, something like Ableton or Cubase is like, what am I looking at? You can spend your entire life mastering this software and all the plugins and all the different things you can grab for it. But I do feel like compositionally, when it comes to a song with melody and harmony and polyphony and different movements, different parts, it's going to be easier just to use a DAW than it is to try to do it with the modular.
Yeah, but then that's tying
I think
you
inevitably
back into a certain paradigm, though, isn't it? It's fitting you back into the idea of a song, which is interesting.
Yeah, well, that's true.
Yeah, because modular doesn't have to be that. Although I might have said this before that sometimes modular music or electronic music lacks a bit of story because we're not singing songs, we're not telling our tales.
Sure.
Maybe we are in some kind of electronic metaphysical sense, but we're not telling them with our mouths in a storytelling kind of way. And there's definitely room, I think, for writing songs on modular. And what would that?
Yeah, I agree. I would love to see that. I would love to see more. I would love to see more vocals in modular. That's something that's almost completely absent. And that if there are vocals, they're sampled vocals that are being, somebody's using a granular processor to chop up into a million bits. But yeah, I would love to see. And in fact, haven't you been threatening to record like basically a modular synthwave album for a while and use modular because I've been watching your videos for a while, so I've heard you talk about this.
Mm-hmm. It's an absolute desire of mine to, because I'm an old traditional songwriter. I write guitar and I play in pubs, that kind of thing. I think part of one's midlife crisis is the understanding that everything is worthless, and how could I possibly write anything words wise that anyone would ever want to hear? It will either be contrite or contrived or just crappy. But yet I see people who I admire who do, and I think I just got to get over myself somehow, and then I could do that. But so definitely I'm very interested in that idea, and it's something that my poor old Magneto, bless it,
Yes.
could contribute to. Because the one time I have used vocals with my modular is when I did an album release last year of something that wasn't modular. It was all the stuff I'd done up until that point, and but I got a friend of mine who often sings with me in previous incarnations. She came along, and she had no rehearsal, she had no practice. I just stood her in front of the modular, gave her a microphone, and said, just kind of go, ah. And what I'll do is I'll stick it through this machine and I'll hit a button and that'll then play back. And then you just go, ah, over the top. And she did that and it was amazing. It was. Well,
I mean, that worked for
brilliant.
Pink Floyd, right? They just got Claire Torrey to come in and say, just sing some stuff. We don't know. It doesn't even have to be words. Just sing some stuff. And it's one of the best parts of Dark Side of the Moon is her complete improvisation that she did. So why can't we have stuff like that in modular? I think that like modules, some of which I know that you don't like clouds. Like if people put vocals through clouds, it would sound beautiful. It would sound amazing.
Yeah.
But no one ever does that. And so, I would love to see more kind of traditional classic, like you said, storytelling, music that has a theme and a tone and movements within it. And maybe vocals. There's a great quote from Roger Waters, speaking of Pink Floyd, where he talks about songwriting and how when Syd Barrett left the band, they didn't have a songwriter. And that's how you get these kind of like science fiction 15-minute long songs, 30-minute songs. And he goes, it's actually incredibly difficult to write a lyric that is simple and it conveys an idea like "I love you" that doesn't just make you want to throw up. Yes. It's like every fiber of your being is like, this is terrible. Why would anybody ever write this? But that's part of the discipline is trying to express these universal ideas in an authentic way. Yeah. And that is something that we don't have in
virus. It's all going to be, I'm in lockdown, and it's just
exactly, Didn't the Rolling Stones just get together remotely and record a song about being locked down? Yeah, so that's what everybody's thinking about right now.
I don't know how that's going. Yeah, I mean there are, just to pick out a couple of people who do sing. Finlay Shakespeare from Future Sound Systems. He roars into a microphone as he plays with those weird Future Sound System modules that I don't have any clue what they're supposed to do. Recombination engine. I don't know what that's doing. But anyway, he sings his little heart out when he's doing
that's awesome.
Yeah, so it does happen, but it's very much in a minority, I would say.
Well, I mean, we'll see if this hobby continues to. I often wonder when I look at some of the forums online, like where are we in the arc of the development of this hobby? Is it still growing? Is it taking off? Has it peaked? I don't know. I know that it's fun because I haven't yet. I don't go to these music shows, these big conventions, or I should say these big like technology conventions. But a lot of the YouTubers I follow do, including you, and they talk about how the only exciting thing at these shows is the Eurorack area, which every year gets bigger and bigger, and there's always new stuff to play around with, as opposed to all the other technology. These are largely solved problems, guitars and synthesizers and stuff. There's not a lot new in those areas. And so I wonder, like, are we at the beginning, the middle? Is it peaked? Is it plateaued? What do you think?
Ooh, that's a good question. I mean, I hope none of those things, I suppose. I hope that it's a continuing journey that continues to evolve. What I suspect, or what I think it's got going for it, is that because it's so varied, because there's such a range of modules, because there's so many avenues you can go down, that every person who starts on it can have their own journey, and it can become something that they can enjoy perpetually. It's a bit like buying a piece of art and sticking it on the wall. You can continue to enjoy it. It doesn't have to be used up and so therefore is no longer useful to you. You can continue to play and to fiddle, more so than a synthesizer. I think with even a gorgeous synthesizer, you can play it as an instrument and then go away and come back and play it as the same instrument. It doesn't really change or evolve. It just is what it is, and can end up very easily stuck up against the wall and gathering dust. Whereas the modular can continuously change, and that's going to give it such a life. Whether we've hit, there's still plenty of barriers to entry. The price is obviously still one.
Sure.
And there's the
and distribution. Like distribution. You can't go to Guitar Center or Best Buy or any of the, like here in America, you can't go to any of these big box stores and buy any modules at all. You're lucky that you can get the Mother 32.
Yeah.
So it's funny because there are some people who feel like they miss the old days of the Eurorack hobby when it was more obscure than it is now. Yes. And meanwhile, I look at it and I'm like, it's still pretty obscure. Like you can't walk into, you can't go to Amazon and get a lot of these modules. Or if you do, they're just using Amazon as like a warehousing thing. And so there's just, still seems like there's tons of room for growth. But I do love the idea that like, you're like, I had a guitar, I bought a guitar, and kind of typically for most people, I think, I played around with it. It wasn't immediately fun. It didn't immediately sound great. And so it lived under my bed for years. But my modular as a hobby, I got into it. And I don't think there's been 3 days together that I haven't played around with it. And every time I got, like, if the music I'm listening to changes, then the way I interact with my rack changes, and the things I want to do and the ideas I have in my head change. And so it's kind of like you said, that piece of art that hangs on the wall. Well, it doesn't change, but you do. And when you look at it and you're different, you're like, you notice things and it means something different to you. And that for me is a big part of modular, is that every time something different happens in my life, I discover some new music or a new artist, I end up bringing something different to the modular.
Yeah, and another trigger I find is trying to emulate something, because that never goes where you expect it to.
No.
You know, if I want to learn a song on guitar, I can, and I can pull it off, you know, but to try to, I listen to something, hear that, and go, oh, that's fantastic, right, I'm going to try, it's gone, oh, I'm somewhere else, and 2 days later I go, oh, this is amazing, and I'm live streaming it, and we're off on some adventure somewhere. You know, and it has that. Yeah,
that process of discovery is, in fact, that's a question I get a lot when I'm showing off, when I'm doing a live stream and I'm kind of talking about the Eurorack process, is people ask, how do you save a patch? I'm like, what do you mean how do you save it? It's physical. What do you mean how do you save it? Like, you just remember how you did it. And there are definitely patches I've got on my SoundCloud that I don't know how I did that. I literally don't know how I got it to make that sound. And when I go back and try to recreate it, I can't. And so there's definitely an element of, it's performative in a weird, unexpected way, because it's just hardware. But every time you try to patch that same thing again, you do it in a slightly different way, and it sounds totally different. And that's part of the fun, I think.
That's the dangerous part of performance. I mean, talking to Eden Gray, she talked about how she goes with no patch. She just has her row of modules, or two rows she goes with. And that's her gig. And that's why her gigs start off with a bit of a droney sound. And you go, okay, when's this going to start moving? But then it starts moving. Yeah. She has to start patching a couple of things just to get it going. That frightens the hell out of me.
Like Colin Benders. Yeah, that's because otherwise I couldn't. She's incredibly brave. But also that's it makes me wonder. I feel like if people understood more about especially a lot of the ambient stuff on YouTube, if they understood more about what was happening, they would be more impressed. Like, yes, these sounds are very pleasant and they are musical and they are pretty and you can listen to them, but the work and effort that goes into building these patches, I think it can be fascinating. I watched, I think Colin Benders streamed every day for like 30 days in lockdown. And you're watching him do this stuff live, and it's super inspiring because he definitely seems like the kind of person that shows up with everything already patched, right? And when you watch his performances, these huge pillars of Eurorack, and there's thousands of cables, but just watching him do something live and create something original is super inspiring. It makes you just want to go do it. Makes you want to patch stuff up. So I'm a huge proponent of I had to get into some new hobby because having been a game developer, turning into a YouTuber about Dungeons and Dragons, which was my hobby, now Dungeons and Dragons is my job. Now it's what I make YouTube videos about, and I write supplements for, and I needed a different hobby. I needed something that was just going to be fun. And for me, Eurorack is perfect. It's perfect because I could never buy another module and spend the rest of my life just learning how all of these work and creating new music. Yeah. So it's perfect.
Well, I have a slight skill on that in that synthesis or music technology seems to be my job miraculously, and I keep pushing at
Yes.
that. And I have hobby, which is tabletop games. So I do that.
Yes.
I do that to detox a little bit from the boxes that are going bing every 5 minutes. So
Yep. Well, I recommend you keep it that way because it can be really like when you make your hobby your job, it can be demoralizing isn't the right word, but it's hard. You spend a lot of your time trying to get back to that spontaneous feeling of when it was just a thing you did for love.
Yeah, no, totally. I mean, I feel that certainly in trying to pump out videos on stuff and to look at stuff and to spend enough time with bits and pieces. It does start to squeeze out your creativity. It does start to squeeze out the effort it takes to get into a space where you can patch. You know, I certainly do feel that, and I'm very conscious of it, and try to make space for it. Which is why I'm not anywhere near as musically prolific as perhaps one would assume I would be. But it's because it's like, for instance, at the moment, in the back of my head, I've got 3 Sound on Sound articles that are churning around, reviews of modules that I've got to do, the weight of the fact that somebody gave me a module to do a video of that I haven't done a video of yet. You know, all of these things are stacking up, and they suppress. That's a word. They suppress. Who knows?
They compress, and suspend. They squash and compress. Yes,
they squash that little area of creativity in the back of your head somewhere, you know, and that's a worry. But yeah, one has to cope with these things.
Well, that's the problem with all this technology we have now is that you and I both, in different areas, we can take our time and convert it into stuff that people can read or watch. You can write articles, you can make YouTube videos, and so those pile up. And you want to make them. They're inspiring. You have ideas for videos, you have ideas for articles, but there's never an end to it. And so you end up not having time to do stuff like sit down with your instrument and just play, because it's too easy to be like, but I could be writing that next. I could be doing a review of that module. Let me ask you a question, Robin. How has YouTube changed your life?
That's an interesting
question. Do you feel like you're always thinking about what video you want to make next, or you feel this this compulsion, not compulsion, but this obligation to the audience to always be making more new videos?
Yes, certainly. I do feel that. And to some degree, I need that in order to push me along to continue to do that. It's a mixture of things because, I mean, I'm at a space where YouTube doesn't actually work as a job. It's not successful enough in order to pay the bills.
Right.
It's an element of it, and it's become, you know, a good part of my income now, which is helpful, but it's not going to put food on the table. So I'm at a space where I'm still kind of doing it for fun, but I'm trying to make it more worky. But the closer I get to it becoming a worky thing, the less I like it. And so I then tend to back off that. So I find what I'm not good at doing is turning it into a business properly. But then in some ways that's just a reflection of me. That's not really that's just not how I do things. I mean, I'm too quick to do things for free. I too quickly put my time into things that I find interesting. So I'm never going to be that slick, successful person. But the flip side of that is that I still very much enjoy what I do. And I mean, the thing that's really, that really, I think, cemented it for me is when I started live streaming. I think I've been doing it for about a year. And it was that interaction with a bunch of people, you know, I don't know, 50 people, whoever it was who's watching my live stream. And I mean, everything is narcissism ultimately. I'm only really interested in finding out what people feel about me so that I can reaffirm my own sense of worth. But it was
You're not supposed to say that out loud.
Yeah, no, it's just really nice to hear that people are getting something out of what I'm doing, and that it's making a difference in some way. It's not just about I want to put out a slick video so that I get views, so that I get money to go and buy more stuff. You know, that's not a cycle I'm particularly interested in. I am really interested in a cycle that says that was really nice, mate, well done, and you know that helped me, or that was worthwhile. Because I know I'm never going to become a successful musician, because again, trying to be a musician is ultimately looking for approval as well. You're trying to get massive approval from people. So I can't achieve that necessarily, but I can achieve small things that I can contribute to either this content or people's entertainment or people's learning. And that, for me, that loop is enormously rewarding. And it's what pulls me in and pulls me through, going, yeah, I want to make another video on this, because I know there's a bunch of people who would love to know how to use this and how interesting that would be. Way. And so, that is definitely my motivation. I mean, there is absolutely an element of, I wish I could do this more often. I wish I could make more money out of it. All those sorts of things are of course there. But the drive is that loop in thinking you're doing something worthwhile somehow. I mean, of course, tomorrow, when all the lights go off, it's going to be completely useless. When Google decide they've had enough and just turn all these servers off, what has my life been about? I don't know. Maybe it's been about exchanges like this, these little moments of interaction.
Well, I mean, the idea of live streaming what you do is, it's the act of connecting to other people who are on the same journey. And that is hugely rewarding. Like I live stream a couple times a week, and I miss it when I'm not doing it, because there's that feeling of connecting to people who are like-minded, and we can talk about all sorts of stuff and show off the process, and people love that. So yeah, I mean, it's unfortunate that YouTube hasn't cracked the monetization problem, because it used to be possible for mid-list or even like kind of second or third tier YouTubers to make decent money. And then there was what they call the adpocalypse, right, where all these companies like Coca-Cola and Nike found out that their ads were playing in front of really questionable channels, and YouTube was like, but it's all algorithmic, like we can't there's hundreds of thousands of people making content, we can't police all of it. And so it's unfortunate they haven't been able to. I've watched really good YouTube channels that I love. After the adpocalypse, they all kind of collapsed, and they weren't able to continue. They weren't able to justify continuing to do it. And that is too bad, because there's, we live in kind of a golden era of what is basically free content. Like I can spend, I almost only ever watch YouTube now. I don't watch TV. I don't watch TV shows. I'm always consuming YouTube content. And I support a lot of them. I support them on Patreon. I join their channels, and I'm happy to do so. But that ad revenue, it really drove things. So it's unfortunate that they haven't been able to solve that yet. But who knows?
Yeah. Well, who knows? But there's always other bits and pieces. I'm always experimenting with new ways to fund things, or just going, oh, what the hell? I mean, I feel very, very fortunate in the job that I do enables me to work in this space that I'm in constantly. And so it's very easy to switch from work mode to children mode to wife mode to modular
That's nice.
mode.
Yeah.
And all of these things happen in a very similar space. And I'm incredibly fortunate to be in that situation, I think. And so I'll just keep doing it while people still like it, I think. And
well, you're a huge inspiration to me. Like I like you, primarily you. There were other YouTubers making music that I was like, oh, how did they do it? But your series on how to get into modular was the one that basically gave me my hobby. It gave me this thing that brings me great joy, and that now I share with thousands of D&D nerds, most of whom are completely perplexed, have no idea what's going on. They humor me, but every once in a while, there's some folks in chat like Paul Pico that's the same thing. They now have this hobby because they watched this D&D nerd talking about this, and it's spreading. It's spreading. Yeah. People are hearing about it, and it's awesome. Like I said, it reminds me of Don Buchla and the Music Tape Lab people saying, we felt like we had found a way for non-musicians to make music, and that's how I feel.
Yeah. I mean, something Mark Doty said last week when I was talking to him was that the last thing they wanted to do was produce documentation or manuals. There was absolutely no point, because you were supposed to get a booklet machine and you were supposed to work it out for yourself. That was the point. That's why we all have the Arturia Buchla V going, I have no clue what to do with this. So that's how it's supposed to be.
Yeah, but it's how it's supposed to be. It's that process of discovery. And there's almost no, like, apart from your channel, like Mylar Melodies does a lot of tutorials. DivKid obviously is the king of modular tutorials, but you're still ultimately going to.
Yeah, you need a language to access Div Kid. Yeah, he is brilliant, totally brilliant. I love the guy.
That's true.
But
That's
there's
true.
a language level that you need in order to access that, which takes a little while to accumulate. I'm still not there completely, but I get a lot more out of his videos now than I used to, because I can follow the drift a bit more.
Well, you don't have to have many modules before you could be dealing with a unique, like there is no video that is these 4 modules and how they work together. There just isn't.
Yeah.
Right? Because you're almost at a point of combinatorics where it would be unique. And so that's another part of the process, is you have to enjoy learning and experimenting. Yes. And if you want that, like if you want someone to just say, here are the tabs, hold your fingers in this position and strum, and you will recognize that chord, then this isn't the hobby for you. Mm-hmm. It's definitely more about what happens if I plug this thing into this thing. And you go, that sounded terrible. Don't ever do that again. But they're like, well, what about this? And something amazing happens. Yeah. Well, thank you very much for having me on, Robin. This is a huge privilege for me to get to talk to one of my heroes, one of my YouTube heroes, one of my modular heroes.
Oh, God bless
please
you,
keep
mate.
doing what you're doing.
Yeah, no, I will. And it's been a joy having you on here, sir. Nobody else would know this, but we've only ever talked to each other via Twitter before. We had
Correct,
a moment.
yes.
We had a moment around War of the Worlds, the experience, where I thought, wow, we might actually get to meet up and do something.
Yeah. I mean, I think I should see here. Yeah. Did I come to that almost too late? Because I remember thinking, well, this thing, it's live, it's in London. And I have friends of mine that were born and raised in London and now live out here. And I don't know why I didn't do it. The thing is, I'm sure I had some reason for not pulling the trigger then. But now that we have coronavirus and we're in lockdown, I'm like, man, I should have taken every opportunity I had to do stuff like go to London and watch that War of the Worlds show, because that album's amazing. I did not discover that album until I was like 45, which is to say a couple of years ago. I didn't even know it existed. And so I had friends of mine who were like, what do you mean you didn't know? It's like one of the best-selling albums of all time. I'm like, I did not know that. And then other friends of mine that also had like, what are you talking about? What is this thing? And so I was hugely hooked on it. Yeah. Also, if you ever come out, you have a standing invitation, assuming that we get back to the point where there is international travel. Right. And my office exists again, as opposed to just being an empty building right now. But if you ever come out to Nam, which is Nam is literally like 10 minutes. It's between where I work and where I live. I drive by the Anaheim Convention Center every day. So if you ever get to the point where you can manage to make it, I know it would be a big deal. But if you ever manage to get out here for NAM, you have a standing invitation to come hang out at the office. Maybe we'll do a video together, do an interview, do my half of this interview, and you can come check out my rack, and we'll just hang out and maybe play Twilight Imperium.
Yeah. Or Dune. I still haven't found any good playmates for that. We have given it a go. And we've kind of stepped through it. And if there's a few too many grumbles, it's kind of like, I'm not sure whether I can bring that game out again, because I'm still interested in working this bugger out. But other
it helps.
Not quite so.
Maybe like it helps if everyone at the table is familiar with the book.
Yeah.
Because if you have a bunch of people that love the book, the game is amazing. Like everything in the game is almost like obvious, but it's super baffling. I think if you don't know the game, if you've never played this game before and you don't know anything about Dune, you're like, what is happening? But we got a new movie coming out like next year, I think. And I think a lot of people, maybe some of your players who were like, that game was dumb, they'll watch the movie and they'll be like, oh, I think I get it now.
Yeah, well, I'm looking forward to that. I mean, I'm a big fan of the original movie, I have to say. I love it.
I am too.
And
I am too, yeah.
Yeah, there's something about the quality of the film. Although, sadly, I did watch it very, very recently, and it doesn't stand up that well, special effects wise and bits and pieces. But
oh no,
I'm still freaked out by the portraits at the end at the credits. Still these live in my strange nightmares of Patrick Stewart and
these semi-transparent faces fading in and out.
It's just amazing. I
remember the shield effect. It was almost like a fake 3D. I don't know if it was actual 3D. It couldn't have been in 1984. And I remember in 1980, I think I probably saw that movie either in 84 or 85 or 86. I remember thinking that was pretty cool. I'd never seen anything like that. Now it looks terrible. It looks awful. It's the worst. Don't people shouldn't go watch that movie. It looks
it suddenly turns into Minecraft, doesn't it?
Yeah, exactly. It's like little Minecraft guys. Exactly. It's like little Minecraft guys running around. What the hell is going on in that movie? But the casting of that movie, the costume design, the set design, I don't think it'll ever be topped. It's so good. That movie is so beautiful to look at. It's kind of tragic that David Lynch didn't get to make the movie that he imagined. We'll never know. Like, I was just talking about this on Twitter. Like, he is still getting people in interviews talk to him about Dune, and he always says the same thing. He doesn't say it was a mistake to try to adapt that book. No. He says, I didn't have final cut.
Right.
That's the lesson. Don't make a movie unless you have final cut. So he imagines that if he had got to make the movie, if he had got to edit the movie his way, that we would all think better of that film. Anyway.
Interesting. There's also a really good game on a PC. So I was an early PC adopter.
Like Dune 2000. Yeah.
No, it was previous to that.
Really?
I think. I mean, Dune 2 was like the first Command and Conquer, but previous to that, there was a game that was Dune, which was more of a storytelling game where you were trying to sow organic material onto this planet, onto the planet Arrakis, of course. And it had a badly pixelated Paul Atreides, Carl McLachlan, Paul Atreides. It was fascinating. It had some lovely bits of graphics, which in its day were just extraordinary little scapes of stuff moving about. I loved it. I played it all the way through the night one time,
That's amazing. I don't think I've ever even heard of that game.
Yeah.
I thought the first Dune video game was the Command and Conquer style game.
No.
Well, now I got to go.
So look that up. Yeah, no, it's nice. You have to wander into the desert in order to court your lady. Things like that. That's a good tip for you. See, when you get stuck there, I can't progress this story. You just wander out into the desert. The girl goes with you. Things.
It's good to know.
Yeah.
Well, definitely, if you are ever out for Nam, we will definitely play Dune, the board game. It is one of my all-time favorite games.
Awesome.
And there is no shortage of friends who want to play it. We all love that game. It's a blast.
Great. Well, then as the host, I should be wrapping this up then, as we nearly hit the 2-hour mark, which is standard for my sort of live streams.
Nice.
So Matt, it's been an absolute joy having you on here talking about this stuff. I hope that the people in the chat have enjoyed it. I've noticed you were talking about country music for a little while, so you're obviously just doing your own thing. That's fine. We don't mind. You just get on with it.
We're talking about doing country music with modular.
Yeah. So that's great. So thank you ever so much for watching. We will wrap this up, I think, just to point out what's happening next. I have Martha Barr with me on Sunday, who is Panic Girl, who is a modular performer. In her work, actually, she uses her voice in a lot of her work. I'm trying to remember now whether she actually sings words, possibly a little bit. I'll have to go back and re-listen. But I'll be talking to her about modular performance, certainly, as I do love her work a great deal. I've got her albums at home. And then following on from that, I've just managed to tie Bob Rogue down from Black Corporation, so I should be talking to him next Monday.
Oh, nice.
Wednesday is a guy from Tenderfoot, a guy called Peter from Tenderfoot, who's out in Taiwan, who makes these really nice little modules that I like. And then I'm going to finish it off on Thursday with This Is Not Rocket Science, which will be some kind of mad party, I imagine, because they're nuts.
Nice.
Pair. So
awesome.
That's the plan. That's the plan for next week. But as this was, thanks ever so much for coming. Thank you, Matt. It's been great meeting you, and this is
it's been
fantastic. Yeah. So we will sign off.
Thank you very much for having me on.
You're very welcome, mate. I will end the stream, and we'll see you all again soon.